Good afternoon, folks. Chief Meteorologist Nick Lilia here with a look at your tropical update for 9/18. It's the 18th of September of 2019. Goodness sakes, time flies, I tell you. Brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters and Remodeling. And I laughed yesterday. I said, hey, they do roofing too. And they do. It's on their sign. Peak of hurricane season was a couple of days ago. We're on the downhill slide from this. I will say, as downhill as the slide is, it doesn't feel like it out there right now. We're all the way through Jerry at this point, waiting on Karen to show up. We hope we don't have to use it, but there we are. I actually looked at the tropical update from 1 year ago today, and we were dealing with Joyce at that point. So we're right about where we are in any typical hurricane season, which makes sense. We were pegged to have an average season this year. Imelda here, still floating around near Houston. You can see the explosion of convection overnight last night. They're dealing with just a mess of rain. Roads are closed, roads are flooded, parts of Galveston is underwater. The poor folks in South Texas there, we're just getting some spray, some high clouds from that. We've got to wait for the backdoor front to start to sneak this direction. You can start to see that show up, the latest one, right? Just whoop, right there. That's the backdoor front that's moving our direction. It's not necessarily a big cold front or anything. It's just a change in air masses, and because there is a change in the air mass and we're close to a tropical system, we're going to have a chance for some showers and thunderstorms. Humberto up here, a wave down here, and Tropical Storm Jerry right there. There was another wave back in behind it right there. And then we kind of ease things off in terms of activity until the next wave that's just coming off of the coast of Africa. But even that's falling apart pretty quickly as the MJO parked over the top of us right now is really doing a good number to keep things nice and active. All right, let's start things off with Hurricane Humberto up here. Currently a Category 3 as it passes by on the north side of Bermuda. Even though it's a lot skinnier on the south side than it is on the north side, the wind field was noted by Levi Cohen. Tropical Tidbits, the guy that runs that website that you probably see me posting about on Facebook and over on my blog a lot, was noting that the south side actually has the stronger wind field. So the folks in Bermuda are going to be dealing with waves and wind from this, also showers and thunderstorms, but they may be getting worse of it than usual. A wind at 120 gusting to 150 miles an hour. Imelda is still out here. Wind doesn't matter. It's no longer a tropical depression, I guess, really. I think it's now no, I suppose it is still a tropical depression. I take that back, but it is still floating around over land. No anticipated increase in the strength there. Where they are going to see some is with Jerry out here, pegged to be a Category 1 and then back down to a tropical storm as it approaches the Bahamas. As we march through the next couple of days, wind at 60 miles an hour. Gusting to 70, moving to the west-northwest at 15 miles an hour. The hurricane hunters were out there a little bit earlier today, not the big jet going through the middle of it, or the big plane going through the middle of it, but rather the jet went around the outside of it aloft and dropped some drop-sons out of it, got a little bit of the atmosphere figured out in and around the system itself. That'll get thrown into the models, I'm sure, as we head through this evening and into the overnight hours and into tomorrow, which should help us figure out where this thing is going a little bit better. For now, I will say that it's not the only thing out here either. It'll also help us figure out what's going to happen with this area as it drifts to the south of Jerry and toward the Caribbean here. It'll also give us an idea. How about this? This thing that I've been talking about for like the last week, the National Hurricane Center finally saying, hey, maybe there's a 10% chance that we see something out of it. And I would tend to agree with that, probably about a 10% chance. It's got to get over the Dominican Republic and Haiti and across parts of Cuba and the straits between Cuba and Florida. It's going to depend on the track of this thing. If anything actually happens with it, the more it's over land, the less chance it'll have, obviously, to develop. The more it stays over water, the better the chance it'll have. Right now, 10%, I think, is probably a pretty fair shot. Back to Jerry we go, real quick with the spaghetti plots. Most of these take it off to the west-northwest and then curl it off to the north. With the new data that's coming in from the hurricane hunters that are out there as we head through the overnight hours tonight and into the early morning hours tomorrow morning as the models churn out, we'll get a better idea of exactly when this turn is going to happen and how things are looking and how far off to the west it'll make it before it makes the turn. The tab D on here is one thing to keep tabs on, no pun intended, as we head through the next couple of days, taking it maybe a little more westerly and getting a little bit closer to Puerto Rico and the northern sections of the Leeward Islands. We'll have to see how that plays out as it gets a little bit closer to the Bahamas. There's been some indication that a stronger storm would have more of a tendency to move west, and a weaker storm would have a tendency to move north. We'll have to see how that plays out because there are a lot of different factors going into that. And again, once the new data gets into the models, we'll have a better idea. Speaking of modeling, 700 millibar moisture, 850 vorticity map. There's Imelda on there. There's Humberto up here, sucking in some dry air. And Jerry down over here. We've got the wave right there that I was talking about the last couple of days, and then the other wave that's back in behind that. Let's set this thing into motion through Friday and into Saturday and early Sunday morning. There's Jerry. There's that little wave right in the little strait between Cuba and Florida. I will say that if it stays again over water, it'll have a better chance of doing something. But the GFS actually, I think, floats it across parts of Cuba, and it just kind of gets eaten up. And then it kind of stalls out near Cuba and continues to get eaten up. Nothing's going to happen. If it crosses over and then slides between Cuba and Florida, you have a better chance of doing something. The wave back in behind Jerry, the other one that had the 30% chance of development through Sunday, early Sunday morning, late Saturday night, looking like it's trying to get organized as it enters the Caribbean, but then it gets kind of eaten up like a lot of the storms do as they enter the Caribbean. This thing ends up trying to wrap itself up just off to the south of us. Now, the last couple of days, the high pressure that's been in control, the little backdoor front that comes through, high pressure settles in. There's been a little crack in that high pressure, and at this point, over the last couple of days, here we are on Wednesday, this thing had already started moving north into parts of Louisiana and Mississippi. The latest model data today shows it continuing to move off and eating some dry air to the west because that ridge of high pressure is a little more stout. Again, this is what happens when you start looking out 7, 8, 9 days. Things can change over one model run to the next. So until you start getting some consistency between those models and between the European and the American and the Canadian and everything else, that's when you can kind of start to hone in on what may or may not happen. The last couple of days we've seen this thing move north either into Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, but now showing it going basically due west and almost into Mexico. I'm not ready to say that's the ticket, that's the right one, newest model data is always right. No, it's not. So it still bears watching as we head through the next couple of days. I will say that there's yet another wave back out here. This is one that's still over parts of Africa that the European wants to break out into something by the time we head toward about September 28th, 10 days from now. So there's a look at your tropical update again, like always, brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters. A lot going on. We've got, what, 4, 5, 6 name systems between the Pacific and the Atlantic. We got a couple of waves out there worth watching, but for now, for South Mississippi, all remains quiet.